Okay. With that, I think we'll get going. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Rafael Larukowicz, and I'm the Program Manager for Identity and Access Management, looking after the Canadian Access Federation here at Canary. Today, we're going to talk to you about the Shibboleth v4 IDP upgrade. Before we jump right into it, let's do a quick round of introductions and go through some housekeeping items. I have here with me Chris Phillips, who's the technical architect for the Canadian Access Federation. Chris is going to run through the core of the presentation. He'll be able to answer any questions that you may have also. Next, we have Hervé Guy for French language support. Also from the Canary team, we have Eric Bitmanis, who's taking care of the technical aspects of the webinar, as well as the Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions in English or French, please don't hesitate to ask in the questions panel below. Eric will then moderate during the question period at the end of the presentation. You can also raise your hand during the question period if you did not get a chance to drop anything beforehand. The presentation itself will be in English. We'll distribute the content both in English and French afterwards. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Rafael. That's great. And thanks to my other fellow Canary employees for helping out on this call. It's always great to see us working with the community. My name's Chris Phillips, technical architect to the Canadian Access Federation, and familiar with many of you on the call. And I want to say thanks for taking your time out of your schedule today. I know it's kind of a busy day, and we hope that we're adding value to your day. As we get started here, one of the things we want to be mindful of is that as we're recording the call today, we may be placing this on the YouTube channel as part of the background information, and just want to let everyone know well in advance that we're going to be recording things, and we may be capturing the names and organizations or your voice if you choose to share, and those kinds of things. So if this is not comfortable for you, we ask you to drop the call, and we'll be able to send out the PDF of the slides afterward if that's the case. With some of that other housekeeping out of the way, I would also like to welcome any of the French participants. Je peux comprendre le français. La présentation va être en anglais, mais il y a une traduction française de la présentation qui suivra en quelques jours de cette semaine. So there will be a translation of the slides to French and provided later on in this week. We'll be able to field the questions in French if you like, and my friend Hervé will be able to help me along with filling in the gaps avec mon français. And with that, we'll get started. A bit of the session overview, and we're going to be talking about upgrades and the new IDP software that's available, Shib v4. And as we see questions come in, we'll see how we'll get along. So thank you for putting them in. And this is awesome to see I have in the first few moments, we have some questions. And I think for that one, Patrick, we're going to push that one a little bit to the further end. So thank you, but hang on to it. We're going to be talking about some strategies to navigate the update and socialize what some of the pieces are there. And we're going to talk about some of the guidance things that we often deal with directly as on one-on-one basis when you contact us at tickets@canary.ca. So we want to share some tools and techniques that we use commonly going through the upgrade process and offer people a checklist. Because when you have this important component, it's critical that it's done in a good and safe fashion, and that you have confidence in being able to accomplish the outcome, which is stay current and stay secure. One of the things we also like to start with, and even though many on the call today, we've already won over your minds, you're operators of an identity provider, we do want to talk about some of the first principle stories about federated identity. You'll hear us talk about Federated Identity Management Service, that's the FIM service, the Saml Trust. And we know that some sites who are early to the game are familiar with these, but some are not. So increasing the reuse of your home credential, using safe and secure and standardized means to transfer and handle this information is really critical, and why we want to have sites come current. And it also reduces the number of credentials needed. Many of us know this, but not all do. And so there's places and times where this component, the identity provider, that really adds the value here. So if you're looking for one of those things on how to describe it to someone outside your organization, or when someone asks you, what do you work on? These are the kinds of things that we recommend people convey, and we hold it dear. And critical is reducing the number of touch points. As the environment gets larger, your identity provider becomes more and more critical. It's a very critical piece. And so when we talk about the identity and access management side of things, again, many of the people recognize on the call, the business we're in is identity and access management. The identity provider is a key player in this. Authentication, obviously, authorization, and attribute release are the bread and butter of the identity provider. And the additional part that is not often talked about when we use the protocol Saml, which is the standard we use, is that it's a multilateral trust as opposed to bilateral. Bilateral means trusting from this point to this point, and this point to this point, and this point to this point. Whereas the Canadian Access Federation in 80 plus of its peers worldwide in the R&E sector use one trust set, and you trust the set of services, and it just makes it so much more efficient. So that these are the pieces of the identity provider. For those who are familiar with some cloud services, it's a bilateral story all the time. And when you try to do a heavy lift, it's difficult. The other thing that we want to highlight is that this is often something that the users see first. And being current, being contemporary, and being able to handle the right protocols are key as well. We also see that the identity provider is instrumental to your technical roadmap. Where else can you advance the kinds of things you want to do with your organization and the kinds of things you want to focus on to stay current, to make it just as easy as it was before to enable services? It's your competitive advantage on having your identity provider current so you can take advantage of things. Also not often talked about is in the identity provider space, certainly this is a place where your users and your cohort of students and staff and faculty come through, but it's also a place where peers trust and interoperate with you. If you want to sign into that other organization's services, where does it happen? It happens through your identity provider. And how do you interoperate with some of your other partners? It's through your identity provider. And when this is kept current and also using multilateral trust, it just makes it that much easier to sign in services. So this is a little bit of preaching to the choir, I would imagine, but I think it's really important to recognize that it's not just authentication, it's authorization, it's attribute release, and it's about streamlining services. So the heart of the material. This is going to be a little bit of our roadmap. I know that some people are very interested in this first bullet. So what we're going to do, the narrative of this presentation is going to be kind of a top flight walkthrough, and then we'll get into some tools and strategies. And when we have the opportunity to have some questions, we'll be talking about the IDP proxy of the OpenID Connect side of things. I do want to mention that many of these slides have links and relevant pieces, and we've placed it at the end of the presentation. So don't worry about scribbling down any particular thing or anything. It will come with the slide deck and the PDF. One of the things in the V4, so it's at version 4.01, which was released July of 2020, and it allows the identity provider to be a proxy. What that means is you can defer to another identity provider the ability to do authentication and maybe authorization if that's a part of it there as well. And by doing that, you can actually use the existing identity provider that you have in your on-premises or in the cloud and be able to have another service such as Azure AD or AWS Saml endpoints be able to do the sign-on, and then you take care of your thing. Additionally, if you want to be able to have a one-stop shop for OpenID Connect and your identity provider be multi-technology, OpenID Connect is supported by a plugin. And with this information, we're only going to talk very high levels about OpenID Connect, but at the end of in the links, we have links to the configuration information, the documentation, and some training that is used by the community about some of the OpenID Connect and how to do it on the SHIB IDP. We're not going to dig into it on this call, but we want to say it's available. The other thing is that when you get to the IDP and v4, is that it's working for you, not against you, in the case with Java. Java is now on a 6-month release cycle, and with that, the tempo of change is really picked up. So the stability of the SHIB product in the tool chain has been so good, and as many recognize, you set it and forget it, and you didn't have to do a lot of curation on it. But now, as underlying things start changing more frequently, there's a lot more ease in managing that change when you're on the latest identity provider. The other thing is that we want to allow sites to get ready for multi-factor authentication and live and work with the latest feature set with the MFA. There's a lot of existing plugins that work with Duo or X509 certificates, and as in the proxy above, can actually use Azure AD. And there's even more on the actual IDP v4 upgrade. I'm just checking the time here. I am going to just take a look at the questions here, Eric. And so we had one from Patrick. Did SHIB4 solve the OIDC flow problem that SHIB3 mod had? Oh, that's a very detailed question. I'm not sure of the answer. I believe it may have, but the OpenID Connect plugin is now folded into the SHIB consortium, is a supported product, think of it that way. And so I would defer to the SHIB consortium team about that. And you had a second question, which is around anyone verify, try moving Glue OIDC APIs to the SHIB4 APIs without changes? Interesting question. I know that the SHIB consortium is working through, or has already gone through, the OpenID Connect verification suite. So if if my memory serves me right, that it has gone through the verification. So if that previous OpenID OIDC API on that Glue server is the same, then I would say you'd probably be able to switch over. And on your question about tools to move from Glue APIs to SHIB4 model, I'm not aware of any at this time, but maybe that's something you can follow up with us after, Patrick. I hope that answers your question or questions. Just want to make sure. Yep, there. So let's talk a little bit about the work. I think if you're like me, sometimes you go, oh man, I have to update this thing. Or if you get into an upgrade scenario, you have a question is like, how much is the right amount of work, or how much work do I have to commit to doing this? So we'll look at how to right size the work and some techniques that you can apply to get there. So one thing we suggest is take a pragmatic outlook to right size and adopt a phased approach to your upgrade. Some of these things are going to be some first principles about doing upgrades, regardless of whether it's the SHIB service or something else. But in this case, really prioritize stability and consistency of the service first. I think that's a common story for many. That way, once you have the lateral or the update working and you're in a stable and consistent story, you can start taking advantage of those no features just that much more easily afterwards. We also suggest sites really think about where are you on your technical roadmap, because that's going to determine the urgency or the importance of that new feature on your roadmap and whether or not it's a critical part of your upgrade cycle or not. And the other thing that we are encouraging people to think about is to take a different tack, or to think about security and sustainment practices more as features rather than as costs to doing an upgrade. A lot of people carry a sentiment of like, oh, I have to do this, as opposed to being excited. It's like, okay, I'm doing security upgrades to stay ahead of the curve as opposed to reactionary. And we want to encourage sites to take a stance of saying that these are features. And with many central IT shops, staying current on something or sustainment often competes with your time and attention on product features. And so that application that needs some work that takes X amount of time competes with the time of I have to keep this current and patched. And this is what we want to shift that story to, and that maintenance and support is an integral of your plan. And when you think about that, there's ways to do this that can dovetail into your existing practices, whether you do a lot of automation or very little automation. One of the things in our area, we often now run our servers running apt or get yum update every day. So instead of having scheduled cycles, the actual scheduling is daily patching and coming current daily. We know that not everyone can tolerate that kind of change or that magnitude of adoption of staying current as closely as that. But there's some very low-hanging fruit ways to think about this. And this way, the actual lift from version to version to version is not as high. So the result is a win-win. You stay more current with overall less effort because you're not doing a huge step in one giant upgrade. You're just doing some smaller steps. You may find this one a little bit backwards, right? So why don't we talk about keeping informed as the very last thing is because we don't want it to be an afterthought. We want it to be one of the first things. And I want to say thank you to the marketing and comms team at Canary, and also for your presence on the call today, because you're doubling down on doing the right thing, and that is staying informed. One of the things you'll see us starting to advocate for is staying informed and join the Shibboleth announced mailing list, at very least if you're a Shibboleth IDP operator, because we're not going to know what exactly you're interested in, but at least if you're running that and you can stay current, you can stay abreast of any of the security advisories, and as well as the end of life notices. The V4 build was released in July of 2020, and what the consortium did in one of those moves of trying to make the staircase of upgrade easier, is they created a last version V348 in December. And the reason they did that is to come current with all the patch cycles of all the subcomponents, of all the dependencies on the older IDP space. And we'll get into a few reasons for why they did that. The other thing that it takes time to give yourself time to sustain your components, your services, and your peers. We know that 2021 is sort of the year of security. This scrutiny on where sites are operating and how they're operating them is going to be very, very important. So you want to give yourself the time to work on these things, and this is why we say to keep abreast. I do want to put an important data point out there for some sites, maybe not all in this call, but one of the key National Institute of Health in the US that has a lot of global collaborators, they are putting a line in the sand in about mid-2021 where they're going to require multi-factor authentication. They're going to require attestation levels of assurance of identity, and they're going to require research and scholarship entity category support. This may sound like, whoa, that's not me, that's not my service, but multi-factor authentication is coming, and there's a dramatic drive towards it. I'm sure many of you on the call are already feeling the pressure on this, and this is just another reason to have your systems connected and be listening what's going on. Again, thanks to the marketing and comms side of things, you're on the CAF communication list, and the primary technical contacts are there. And we have a CAF Slack channel that's coming soon. Rafal, you're on the call. Would you like to make one or two comments on the Slack channel story?
Yeah, we're just, thanks for that. We're working on that internally, and we're hoping to get that to you guys as soon as possible so that we can build the community and get the conversation going through that medium.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thanks. So let's think about some software patterns that drive your sustainment approaches. When I think about the recommendations we have on the one-on-one conversations, we want to socialize how the software is built and how it's maintained so that people can make informed decisions that complement or dovetail into the way that they're going to maintain the software. And it's really important to know that the SHIB Consortium does really great job of working on upgrade in place stories, but not everyone may be able to take advantage of them. So in the SHIB consortium update in place model is really good for that incremental upgrade story. And for those who are exploring a much larger step, you know, that bigger first step from V3 dot something, or even pre to that, we would advise to think about some of the other things that you want to upgrade with. So things we would encourage you to think really carefully about of your operating system. This is harkens back to the Java comment. And how are you getting your JDK on that machine, or how are you getting that machine and keeping it current? So that platform's technique and technology has changed since 2018. Underlying tools are now on that 6-month release cycle. And so those are changed. The API for the Java libraries for sign-on for version, I think 3.8.4, maybe only in version 4.0.1, have fundamentally changed. So being able to connect to your LDAP directory is a really key thing. And what the V4 platform has an abstraction of the property files that make that much easier. And when you go through your update strategy, is this approach okay with is your approach that you want to take okay with this upgrade tempo? So you heard me comment that some machines that we operate update daily, and some update incrementally in different tempos. Your site, you guys know your site's the best and your tolerance for change the best. So we would encourage you to some deep thought on, is this tempo make sense for you? A very easy automation win is just having a cron job or a time job on your machine to do the update on the packages and use snapshots in case of recovery, because the risk on a failure on an upgrade or an update like that on subsystem stuff is not as great as having a risk of something so stale that it takes a lot of effort to move. The other thing that we're also seeing in the field is that there's really changes in cryptography. So cipher suites that once were considered safe or okay are now not okay. So the SSL Labs verification, just check your cipher suites, those kinds of things are now moving to a GCM-based cipher set. And the V4.0.1 comes in newer, or comes with those. And we also encourage sites to consider, where are you in this journey of keeping current? And if you're sitting back and saying, oh, I didn't even know this was a thing that we needed to track. Well, if you were doing just regular updates with the OS, you kind of get those, you're along for the ride, and that's great. Then the effort is a lot less. So if you have the ability to do the upgrade in place, absolutely do that and keep on doing it. If you have all these other things that you need to fold into the conversation, we encourage a lot of thought there. I'm going to pause for just a second. I see that, Harry, you post a question into the chat, or maybe an observation. Okay, so what Harry you just mentioned is just an additive item that about OpenID Connect. It's not quite a question, but thanks. Eric, quick question: if it's in the open areas, all the other attendees see this?
No, only we do see the open questions at the time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so maybe Harry, that's something to share maybe later on in the call. Thank you. So an approach to the upgrade. Again, this is a culminating story, and our story here today, and why you're spending some time on the webinar with us, is, can you save me time doing this, Canary? And the answer is yes. And so hopefully by highlighting some of those points that we're talking about and offering one approach, not the only one, but one approach to the upgrade, we hope that we just make it that much easier to stay current. And if you're on the call and you're already on V4, thank you. You've already gone through some of this, and we thank you for staying current on it. And I hope that we can also augment and add some value to your hour today. So if you think back to the previous slide about the things to think about, we know that sites run with a system that is consistent. So we suggest you provision at least new systems for both test and production to emulate what you're going to have in your final product of your update. The other thing is, what's my technique of choosing to install for the IDP v4? We're going to talk about that on our next slide. The other thing is bringing forward your site settings. So if you're able to upgrade in place, The upgrade in place model, so if you have a version that's 2 or 3 versions, let's call it 2 or 3 versions predecessor to v4.0.1, what would happen if you did an upgrade in place is you'd have to upgrade from the where you're at to the next one until you get current and remove any of the deprecations, and then upgrade to the next one, then remove any deprecations, and then you can upgrade to v4 if you're that far back. But if that is too much effort and you're not familiar with that, if you provision a new system, you'll be bringing forward some of your site settings into your test IDP. You'll be exercising some of the syntaxes have changed, some of the uses of data connectors have changed, and we find that that's a really solid way of doing it as well. The other thing that we're very fortunate to have, and it's intentional, and that is the Caf Test Federation. So the Test Federation is meant as an instrument that is available to any CAF participant. And it's not that you test once and then you never use it again. We encourage you to have your test server in the Caf Test Federation and then work on that. And then if you have incremental changes that you want to test some point in the future, you're just mission ready. You're already in the test system. You can go through the process. If you want to have your pre-production server in that Test Federation as well, that's entirely viable too. And we can work with you on that as well. So provision new system, choose an installation technique, bring forward your settings either in place or as a migration, and then test and then go to the production is a common one. We're about half hour in here. So techniques. Not everyone knows exactly what the IDP does, is how it's structured. So we have the software. It needs a servlet container. So it needs a web server servlet container. Some sites choose to use Jetty or Tomcat as that servlet container and as a web server. Some sites choose Apache up front, or they choose to have an F5 load balancer or a load balancer up front. But basically, when the software installs, it needs to run in a Java servlet container that needs a JDK, that needs an operating system. And you can hear a bit of repetition in the message here is that leverage your OS package management, because if you deploy as a classic model, and that is provisioning a new system, laying the software down, and relying on the package management, you defer a lot of that work into the operating system. And it's a lot easier now in v4.1 because it uses the OpenJDK. And because it's on the OpenJDK version, it's that much easier to stay current. This also, pedigree or the ancestry of where you get your software from is also important, which is why we refer to operating system packages first, as opposed to just download some tarball and put it there. The installation details are well defined. The URL for this one is on the wiki, apologies, on the Shibboleth wiki, but we will have this link at the end as well. It's also friendly to build automation. So if you have Ansible, Salt, or Puppet, or those kinds of things, and when you provision your machines and your model is have the automation provision machine, have automation deploy software, have automation do that, it dovetails quite well into that. There are sites that that are also dabbling in DevOps world. So DevOps is development and operations and the smushing of that together. And when you bring the developers into the mix of the people who do operations, then speaking on both sides of the fence, you want your developers to feel the heat of what does it mean to operate something. And you want operators to appreciate some of the challenges in the development cycle, that this may be why X is challenging. We use the internet too, or we recommend, if anyone's going to go towards the Docker containers, to really investigate the Internet 2 Trusted Access Platform. Their containers are built at least monthly, and they're kept current with the latest releases of the software, and this is what their community uses as well. The Shibboleth Consortium does not provide containers. It provides just the Shibboleth IDP software and the recommendations on how to install. It's unlikely that the SHIB, at this stage of the game or for the next couple of years, to see the SHIB consortium shipping containers themselves, because they focus on the software process itself as opposed to the delivering of the service. And we always get asked, which is right for me? And unfortunately, the question is answered with an is it depends. And I hope that by asking or putting forward some of the questions to ask yourself about how do you keep current and the technology you base it on, the platform you're on, we know that those all play a role in choosing what pathway on the installation technique. A little bit on the system settings and bringing forward. So we have stuff about system-wide settings, and we have stuff about the service settings themselves. We recommend that sites don't change their entity ID unless you really, really have to do that. So if you have a server that needs to change name because you install a new one, don't change, you can change the name of the server, but don't change the name of the service. So if the service is idp.myschoolname.ca, that's great, keep that. Because if you change that entity ID, anyone's other's privileges or any settings saying when entity ID comes through here of this one, do this, you're going to invalidate that. The other thing is about Saml signing keys. So we often find people commingling certificates with running the web server and what users see with the green lock in your browser, commingled with Saml signing certificates. So Saml signing certificates are the certs that you have in the metadata. So there's the public portion in the metadata, and then there's the private key. So you have the ability to take your existing keys and bring them forward to your new instance. You can copy your production keys to your new pre-production server, and you literally can test the sign-on with your new pre-prod server, and we'll talk about that in a few. The other thing is we've encountered some sites when they want to change things around or adapt things, or I'm going to go from one style to another style, that there's some of their SAML protocol endpoints change. Just like the entity ID, we don't recommend changing the SAML protocol endpoints unless you really know what you're doing. And the good news here is that the IDP itself is going to keep those endpoints there for you and just carry that forward. Also, one of the real key things, and pardon the pun, is that salts and secrets for operating your IDP. So a salt is a set of randomized characters that are used in a hashing algorithm. So it defeats the attack vector of rainbow tables where everything is pre-computed for a particular value. And so salts are used to generate persistent identifiers or opaque identifiers for unique IDs. So if you don't bring the salt forward and you upgrade your identity provider and you create a new salt or it's absent, then what's going to happen is all your unique IDs are going to be different. And that's obviously not very desired. So you want to mitigate that by just bringing forward your salts. So shifting a little bit to the service configuration side of things. So now that we have, we've decided how we're going to do the update. We've decided that we're choosing either an in-place upgrade or we're going to choose a install new and then overlay all my settings. We're going to take a look at three main files, and that is the attribute resolver for how attributes are resolved. When you think of your technical roadmap, this is one of the areas that you're going to think about when you know which services are using which attributes. This is exactly where the rubber hits the road. For anyone contemplating Azure AD updates or using Azure AD with the SHIB v4 in front of it as a proxy, this is where life gets very interesting. We do have a link to the how-to that we've authored because we did the investigation on what does it take to do Azure AD integration. And one of the things we found is that not all institutions have all their data in Azure AD. So now in organizations that are doing the IDP upgrade are faced with the challenge of saying, okay, I'm going to get some attributes for Azure, I'm going to get some attributes from on-premises or some subsystem that exists. And this is where that mapping happens. If you're doing an in-place upgrade, these areas are all where the places where you'll have the deprecation warnings. It will happen and the upgrade will happen and then say deprecated, This is not going to work in the future, but I'm working for you right now. So these are the files you need to take a look at that will link back to those error warnings. I do see some of the questions coming in from you, Patrick, and we'll save there's a lot of OpenID Connect questions, and we'll keep those for a little bit later. Thank you. The other thing is to review and migrate the content to the respective locations in v4. So as a general statement, the software from version to version to version has kept pretty consistent. There's some enhancements that they've done for improving the attribute mapping dictionary, for improving the metadata file management. If you're on a very old V2 machine, this one is actually metadata.xml as opposed to metadata-filter. And there's, is a general statement, those are some new locations. And we encourage sites, again, to think of yourself as you migrate, version control the configuration directory. And also, when you've done this very first step of assessing your services and attributes used, are you able to consolidate some of that? Because if you have 5 attribute release stories for 5 different services, and yet they all release the same attribute set, you can consolidate that down to one rule. That's reasonably straightforward. It means materially less configuration. Additionally, if you, as you recall, I mentioned a few moments ago or a few minutes ago about research and scholarship entity category, that's about attribute release. Maybe those services are RNS enabled and you don't even have to have that rule there. If you're already RNS, the rule might be spurious. So you have an opportunity to really shrink the information that you need to migrate. One of the things that everyone is very interested in is testing the update. So are you able to test things? And the answer is yes. So you have a variety of ways of doing that. And we'll get into some of these pieces here. So if you're ready with your test instance or your pre-production instance, the candidate to replace the old one, you can have us put that into the Test Federation. And what will happen there is it's a mirror of our production federation. The metadata updates every 5 minutes for rapid testing. It has its own discrete separate discovery service. We have a test provider called validator.caftest.canary.ca. And we can have pre-production and production entities present as well as just plain test ones. And you would say, well, Chris, isn't this a problem if I have my production and test? The answer is not really, because if you're going to do a production test, but you want to test the sign-in to the validator, you have that flexibility of being there. You have a test service that you want to have or you want to test against. You can do that with a separate connection or a separate trust there. You can choose to, in your production environment, to remove the test connection afterwards once you go live, but there are viable testing rationale in there. The way to get into the Test Federation is that it's a simple email to tickets@canary.ca, which will come to our operations team, and we'll either, if the entity already exists, we'll be able to have a join, and then as you go about your testing, it just happens, or if it's a new entity, we'll add it into our Federation Manager. We don't have any self-service stuff yet, and if that kind of thing interests you, I would encourage to reach out to Rafal as saying, hey, this is of interest to us, and you have an interest in the CAF to pursue some of those self-service sides. Often, when you, as someone wanting to test something and say, did I do everything? Did I get everything right? This is what validator.caftest.canary.ca looks like. It has some setup details. It has, you tap the test sign on to actually go to the test discovery service. The see your session is what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. And you see the logs. And so the logs, what we've done here is we refresh these logs of the warning, the IDP process log, and the audit log as well. And what happens is when you sign in, you can actually see, did it actually work or did it throw an error because of something? Like I missed an attribute. How come I didn't see this? And you can also see things through the shib.sso session through URL browser. This is not a PII risk or leak, because what's happening is you're looking at your own information, and we don't release information. These attributes are only shown in the browser, not in the logs. It does show common name or eduperson principal name was released or given name, but it doesn't show the value there. We also encourage sites to leverage SAML Tracer if you're really getting into the nitty gritty while you're testing, because that way you can actually see the SAML process go through. And also another hint to pay it forward to people doing testing is that if you're seeing a site of crypto, the IDP is always going to encrypt the block of attributes. And if you want to relax that condition, you can totally do that in the relying party XML on a service by service basis. This is a little bit, this information is a little bit hard to come by unless you ask for it. And this is why we have it in the presentation today. Now, more testing. Testing is a great thing. You can do your own testing without having to actually do the sign-on. So what you saw on the previous slide was, hey, I'm going to be a user. I'm going to click through signing in with my test account or signing with my own account, and I'm going to see, does it do what it did before? Here, what happens is on the server, you can skip that sign-on part, and once you have the necessary privileges on the IDP, you can actually use command line sign-on, and then it will reveal the assertion that it's going to send over the wire to you. That's really powerful. The details can be found here at the IDP4 AACLI. I believe it's command line attribute authority. And complemented with that is you can increase the verbosity of your IDP and SP or the SP for your login. The other thing that we're encouraging sites to really deeply consider is system health monitoring. Many are using load balancers like F5, or you have Nagios or Big Brother monitoring or those kinds of things. And it's not just about server up. You want to say server up and healthy. And that's what we want to do on the Access Federation as well. So there is a status URL. The link can be found here at the / in this case, the example is at localhost status. It's typically /IDP/status. And there's some permissions that are set to prevent undesired IP addresses to be able to see that. And what we request is that if we can have the Canary IP space to be able to allow to invoke the status URL, that would be really very helpful for us to assist you in diagnosis. It has to be done in advance of before an issue arises and say, I need help, because it needs a server restart to have the right IP addresses in there. The example of the information that is revealed is on the right-hand side. So operating system, obviously it's important information and it's meritful to be discreet on who it's released to. And as your federation operator, you want us to be able to best offer our best foot forward on diagnosis, this is instrumental for our needs. It's not often able to be used, but this is a really key thing for us on monitoring as well. And we encourage you to consider it. So we're getting close to the final pieces. And this one is also something that I think some veteran server administrators are familiar with, but some may not be. And that is, what happens is as you build out your pre-production, your upgrade candidate IDP, what happens is you bring this one up to date and you bring your production keys over to it. So it walks and talks as if it's the production one. And then you override your hosts to point to that one when you do a sign-on. And note that I don't point anywhere back here on the actual data store that it goes to, but if it's going to be the pre-production upgrade candidate, what would happen is you would point it back to your existing production directory. So when Chris signs in, he is still signing into the same data store, identity store as he was in the old production environment. Because what's happening is you're just going to do a side-by-side test on the other machine. Is this going to work? And is this announcing itself in the right way? And this is a fantastic way to do very isolated testing with the highest degree of confidence that when you hit that go live story, it's a non-event. That's the best event ever, right? As a non-event. And you have a built-in fallback plan. So once you say, yes, I'm ready to go, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing in attribute release, I can test signing into services. You can you see your test plan populated. You could say, yes, the attributes are exactly calculating what they should be. And I also have and your plans are already well described. You have a high degree of confidence that the work you've done is exactly on the mark. And so when you flip over to go live, your retired RDP is still there, just idle, because what you have done is just changed over DNS. And if you ever said, oh my goodness, I have a problem, you always have that option of either fix and continue forward, or if necessary, fall back to existing and give you that really good spot for your change control stories. So we're just doing a brief recap here. As you can tell, it was kept high level. We have about 13 minutes. I'm just going to be 1 or 2 slides, and then we'll open the floor for some questions. So just really 3 things. Determine the approach that you want to take. How much is that upgrade going to, how much is that upgrade going to cost me in effort? Just make sure that you are comfortable with the scope that you choose. Assess your services and features that are in that scope, and implement and verify. So those are the 3 big moving pieces. And I hope that today, with the top flight walkthrough and the opportunity to have some questions, that everything can be pretty relaxing. You can look at the kittens online. It's just, we're here to help, and that's why we're on the call today. And yeah, so you can contact us at tickets@canary.ca, and then we can line up a strategy for you and then see where you are in that strategy. And with that, we've reached the end of our presentation and have room for comments and questions. So I see Patrick, and you're really digging on the OpenID Connect APIs. I can see that you're so some of the questions that Patrick is asking and are, what are your thoughts on auto enrolling of OpenID Connect APIs under Shiv v4 and IPv6 environments? Wow, you're wrapping it all in one. Auto enrollment in OpenID Connect is something that you really need to think about carefully, because auto enrollment, I'll have to be careful here because I want to make sure I have enough precision on it. Auto enrollment in some cases means that you just say yes, connect, without evaluating should you even allow it. This is critical, because if you just throw the doors open and say, yep, OpenID Connect is there, and you auto enroll any client, what's to prevent a nefarious client from connecting? So where's the trust is my question. I would encourage you to think about, where is trust in that model of auto enrollment, and have you exercised your duty of care of your trustworthiness on those endpoints to auto enroll? There's probably additional fidelity or things you can apply there, but that would be the very first thing. And one of the things that we're looking at and are participating in at the OpenID Foundation is this research and education federation with OpenID Connect. And that speaks directly towards this trust question, because you want to be able to use OpenID Connect with the great Saml trust model that you enjoy today. Now, you also mentioned IPv6, and I think that's really kind of orthogonal, as numbers could be large. Sure, IPv6 is part of the operating system, and so the things you need, just like any other IPv6 rollout, and back to the original story of what's in scope, are you going to do all these things? And if you're already serving IPv6, sure, keep it in the mix. If you're not serving IPv6 and your new machine is going to be IPv6, you have a bunch of other questions to ask yourself, or such as, is the firewall settings for that system on IPv6 accurate? Or are the network paths in IPv6? Is my diagnostic story on IPv6 accurate as well? Because we've seen, and I'm sure there's a number of people on the call that go, oh, yeah, that problem was because IPv6 was active and the site didn't have it, or they didn't have a gateway for v4 to v6. So think about those things as you in your questions there. Oh, we got a couple others here. Shib v4 OIDC we tested with against Hadoop. I don't have any answers on that, Patrick, on the testing against Hadoop and RESTful endpoints. But if it's OpenID Connect, it's OpenID Connect. And if there's problems connecting, take a look at the Shib users list as a starting point. Does the validate work with RESTful OIDC APIs? Not at this time. So that's not an OIDC endpoint. So I see another one jumped in there. So Robert, is there a working CAF IDP installer anymore specifically for C7? Not at this time, because the problem was with Java. There was a variety of challenges there. Java installation, the changes in the LDAP configuration, and the underlying OpenSSL stuff was really the biggest challenge. But honestly, the choice of migrating away from the Oracle Java track and not running afoul with the Oracle Java there was really a critical consideration. And that's also one of the reasons that we recommend the Internet 2 Docker containers. It already takes care of the Java installation. It takes care of the OS update and such. So there's a page, you could take a page out of the Docker file and say, well, okay, which pieces are here? They use the AWS Java, which name escapes me right now. It's not Cortana, it's Cardero. But they use that particular one. If sites are, the SHIB consortium on the Java versions, I believe are testing with a variety of OpenJDKs, as well as it sounds like an oxymoron, but I believe it's OpenJDK built by Oracle. So yeah, we'll smirk on that. So another question from Patrick, most OIDC apps say on Play Store, assume the OIDC APIs are enabled for auto enrollment. If you're looking in the mobile side of things and saying, I want to have mobile OpenID Connect sign-on, that's a great use case. And again, I asked the question, is every device that you want to have and allow to connect OpenID Connect, does it follow the trust model you want to embody? That's a very much bigger conversation. So Patrick, maybe hit us up after the, maybe not necessarily today, but I don't know your school, but if there's some OpenID Connect stuff, we absolutely want to bring the community together on this story, because this is just one, as we mentioned, that we're working with the OpenID Foundation. And if we can surface these requirements into there, then we are your advocates for research and education requirements into the OpenID Foundation. And with that, I know we don't have any more questions actually typed in, but I want to absolutely give some time here for either voice asks and such. Okay.
We have a couple new questions surfacing just now, if you don't mind taking a look.
Sure, thanks. Yeah. So Dominic calls out, public service announcement. If anyone's using the ShibCAS Authn plugin, make sure you update the plugin if you go to V4, as you'll run into weird error messages that can't find answers to online. I can appreciate that, Dominic. What I've seen sites have done in the past with CAS, so for those not familiar with the central authentication service, is it's a single sign-on. It's the authentication component, not as much as authorization, and cohabitates with the SHIB component. The CAS servers now can be a bona fide IDP, and the SHIB server can itself be a CAS server. But if you're delegating the active sign-on where you put user ID and password into CAS, that's probably the plugin you're talking about. If you've customized the CAS part, you're going to have to bring your customized jar into the web server, into the SHIB land. So yeah, I've been there, had that problem, and also assisted sites that had that problem too. So thanks. And yes, Harry, I saw the introduction, and Harry, if you want to throw an okay into the chat window, I can just see your last name as well and where you're from, just so Patrick knows where you are. I'll leave it for that. And are there any questions? Other questions? We're here to help and love to hear more from you. All right, we have so what we see is presenters. We see the questions come in. You may not see them. So Patrick, you got a really great set of questions going here. So does SHIB v4 now support backend replication for true hot failover? SHIB 3 do not support this correctly. And number 2 is with OIDC hook on the SHIB, how many backend databases now need to be replicated? Oh, that's a good one, the OIDC one. So what we see are sites that run as stateless as possible. There is the ability for, when I hear hot failover, I hear high availability, which means session replication. So I believe it's a memcached story there, and it's actually a lot simpler now. But the real question you need to ask yourself is this really a sessionless story? Because if you already have the active SHIB session, is it going to reinterrogate your browser at some point in time, and when is that? So if you have thousands of sessions, then is there a true necessity here? If so, then what it means is you'll have to build N of everything. So at least 2 or more of those servers. And then you can use them as active as opposed to active and standby. Robert, great question. How long are the old SHIB 3x SHIB servers still work? So Robert, they will function. What will happen is that you won't be getting the security patches. You won't be staying current with security, and it will lag. So there's critical underlying components, and that's part of the reason when the SHIB consortium went and created the v38 version. Is that this slide deck? This slide. Yeah, so that's exactly one of the reasons that they created the version 348 here, is so that sites that are on the 3 version at least could come current there, get rid of the deprecations, knowing that they can say last known good jump point to v4. So it's not that it's going to turn off. What you're going to find is your CISO is going to come to you and say, you're not patched on ... Ones that come to mind might be OpenSAML, Spring libraries. Actually, the other watershed moment is those are unsupported after December 2020. So it's not going to halt working. You're just going to be less and less safe and secure as you go forward. And this is why we're on the call today. Thanks, Harry. So Harry Mavaganam is commenting on that from UBC, is really interested in the OpenID Connect. And we encourage others who are interested as well to feedback to Rafal or Eric or tickets@canary.ca as well. I'm just mindful we're just at the top of the hour, and I see a couple more questions flowing in here. I just want to capture the different ones. If you indulge me for just one more moment or two. What are some recommended or popular MFA solutions that integrate well with SHIB v4? Duo security is one. Privacy IDEA may be another, and the SHIB IDP v4 is a proxy on version 4.1 of the SHIB IDP that's coming. Actually, no, on version 4.0, on the current version, if everyone in Azure AD is doing multi-factor, you can attest to that. So there's some there as well. X509 client certificates are another. The slide deck will be through email, and I believe it either is an attachment or a link. How many, Jean-Francois? So how many installations use the v4 in a Docker container in production? We know once we're working with an institution right now who's already just at the cusp of going in production in CAF. We know of some schools already in the US using the InCommon platform that are production, version controlled, using Docker Swarm, high availability, and that. So we are mindful that there's a lot of good stories that have preceded us, and we're working very closely with an existing one that we can use as a white paper. And also guidance here. So if you have deeper questions on that, you can hit us up at tickets@canary. And I think that's it. So again, thank you very much for attending the call today. I really appreciate it, as do we all at Canary. And yeah, so I see one more from Todd Julian. Not all our users multi-factor authentication may split in the future. Staff use Duo Student and students use Azure. Is this a problem? It's an increase in complexity. It's not a problem. It just means your configuration is going to be that much more complex, and we'll have to think about what those are. So it just means there's more gyrations there. And with that, I think we'll close the call for today. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.